It started like any other job, just another late-night delivery, another mile on the road. I was a long-haul trucker, no questions asked, no paper trail, just the promise of quick cash and an anonymous drop-off at a sprawling estate. The address? A secluded, high-security mansion owned by none other than Sean "Diddy" Combs. I'd heard rumors, of course, whispers of parties, secrets, and strange disappearances, but I never believed them. That night changed everything. What I saw, what I was forced to become a part of, still haunts me. I thought I was just delivering cargo. I had no idea I was stepping into a nightmare. This is the story of how one delivery shattered everything I thought I knew and stole my soul. The call I had just finished my morning coffee, a regular ritual that helped steel my nerves for the long haul ahead. It was a typical start to the day, nothing out of the ordinary. The dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio, his usual monotone greeting. "Got a run for you, Miami to LA. Nothing special, just a regular delivery." I nodded to myself, mentally going through the route in my head. Another cross-country haul. No problem, until he mentioned the client. A name that made my heart stutter for a moment, a name I couldn't ignore. "Sean Combs," he said, pausing for a beat as if testing to see if I'd react. That name hit me like a punch to the gut. Diddy. I wasn't one to obsess over celebrities, but even someone like me, a guy who spent more time in truck stops than in front of a TV, knew that name. He was everywhere, on billboards, in music, on the cover of magazines. The man had an empire, a life wrapped in luxury, wealth, and fame, the kind of life most people dream of. And now, I was going to be hauling freight for him. It didn't make sense. What was a celebrity like Diddy doing with a lowly truck driver like me? I shook it off, trying to keep my focus. But when the dispatcher gave me the pay rate, $155,000 for one run, it was hard to ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. That was more money than some truckers made in an entire year. It didn't add up. Money like that comes with strings attached. I knew that much. But curiosity and the need for a paycheck won out. I signed the paperwork, hopped into my rig, and set off, not knowing I was driving straight into something I couldn't escape. The road to uncertainty. The road between Miami and Los Angeles is long, endless stretches of highway cutting through desert landscapes and lonely towns that blur into each other. The hum of the engine beneath me was comforting, like an old friend whose presence anchored me to reality. But there was an undercurrent of unease, a feeling I couldn't shake, no matter how much I tried to drown it out with music or the rhythm of the road. Something about this run didn't sit right. It wasn't just the money. It was the way the dispatcher had mentioned Diddy's name. Casual, like it was just another drop-off. But I couldn't escape the nagging thought. Why me? What did I have to do with someone like him? As I drove deeper into the night, the sense of anticipation in my chest grew heavier. The weight wasn't from the cargo, it was from something else, something I couldn't see but felt in the pit of my stomach. Every mile felt longer than the last. Every turn I took made the feeling intensify. When I finally reached Los Angeles, the city didn't greet me with its usual blend of chaos and opportunity. Instead, I found myself in a place that seemed disconnected from reality. The mansion loomed ahead, a structure so large and imposing it looked like it belonged in a movie set rather than real life. Towering gates, polished to a shine, surrounded the estate. Security cameras dotted every corner, their unblinking lenses trained on anyone who came too close. I parked my rig, my hands gripping the wheel tighter than usual. I was about to unload what I assumed was some high-end cargo, furniture, electronics, maybe some designer goods. What I saw, however, was far from what I expected. The mansion and its secrets. As I slowly drove down the long driveway, I couldn't help but feel like I was intruding on something. There were guards, sure, but they weren't just your average security team. These men were something else. Their eyes were sharp, scanning me and my rig like they were trying to peel back the layers of who I was. There was no warmth in their gaze, only a cold, calculating focus. I parked in front of the mansion, the tires of my truck crunching over the gravel. I expected a team of movers, maybe a few workers helping to unload the truck, but instead, a group of men in plain, forgettable clothes stood waiting. Their faces were expressionless, cold as stone, as though they were all cut from the same cloth, one of fear and submission. Their movements were mechanical, like they had rehearsed this routine 1,000 times before. There was no chatter, no friendly gestures, just an eerie, silent efficiency that made my skin crawl. The man who stepped forward to speak had an unsettling presence about him. His gaze never wavered from mine as he barked, "Unload the cargo!" My confusion swirled in my gut. This wasn't what I had signed up for. There was no designer furniture, no high-end electronics, no glamorous items fit for a celebrity mansion. Instead, there were boxes. Plain, brown, and nondescript, just boxes, about the size of a pizza box. They were sealed with clear tape, carefully and methodically wrapped, as though someone had taken extra precautions to ensure that nothing inside could be seen. The men began unloading them with precise, almost robotic movements, stacking them in neat piles like they were some kind of ritualistic offering. The boxes and the cold warning. I approached one of the men, trying to sound casual. "What's in the boxes?" The man in charge didn't even flinch when I asked. His expression remained unchanged, the corners of his mouth barely twitching as he locked eyes with me. "You don't need to know," he said flatly, his voice cold and lifeless. It was a simple, blunt answer, one that left no room for follow-up questions. But it was clear to me now. I had crossed a line. Curiosity in my line of work was dangerous. Asking questions wasn't just frowned upon. It was a surefire way to find yourself tangled in something you didn't understand. As they finished unloading the cargo, my mind raced. $155,000 for hauling boxes. Boxes that looked ordinary, but something about them felt wrong. I didn't ask any more questions. I didn't want to know. The man handed me an envelope, wordlessly, and I took it without hesitation. No thank you, no small talk, just a transaction. A cold, sterile exchange. I climbed back into my cab, my hands shaking as I started the engine, the hum of the truck filling the silence. The envelope and the payment. Once I was back on the road, away from the mansion, I finally allowed myself to open the envelope. I felt a twinge of excitement mixed with trepidation as I peeled back the seal, the paper crackling in the quiet cab. Inside were neatly bundled stacks of $100 bills, crisp, clean, and in quantities I couldn't even begin to comprehend. I had just made more money than I ever had in my entire life for a single job. I started counting the bills, each stack more surreal than the last. It was $155,000. No mistake about it. I had expected some kind of shady deal, but this was something else entirely. The money was real, no doubt about that. But the way it had come to me, through those cold, expressionless men, through the plain boxes, through the warning in the man's eyes, it felt like I had unknowingly stepped into something much darker than I could have ever imagined. The offer. "How big?" I asked, the words leaving my mouth before I could stop them. I knew I shouldn't ask, but I had to know. I had to hear it out loud, even if it meant giving in to temptation. The answer came fast, too fast. $100,000, he said, like it was no big deal. The number hit me like a freight train. I nearly choked on my own breath. 100,000. For one run? It felt like a joke. Too good to be true. The kind of money I'd only seen in movies or heard about in whispered stories at truck stops. It was a sum that could change everything. Buy me everything I'd ever wanted. Wipe away years of working for pennies. But the dread, that same gnawing feeling from the last job, settled in my stomach like a rock. My gut screamed at me to say no, to hang up the phone, to walk away from whatever dark hole I was being dragged into. "Are you serious?" I asked, my voice cracking, hoping that I misheard him. "Dead serious," he replied. "No hesitation. They want you because you're reliable." Reliable. That word. It used to make me proud. It used to mean something. But now, it felt like a noose tightening around my neck. A word that had been used to trap me, to bind me to something I didn't understand. Something that felt darker than anything I'd ever imagined. I wanted to hang up. I wanted to run. But $100,000? The money burned in my mind, louder than my conscience. "What's the catch?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. No one pays that kind of money without expecting something in return. "No catch," he said, almost too quickly. "Pick up a trailer near the Mexican border and bring it back to Los Angeles." A trailer. Near the border. My mind flashed back to the last time I'd hauled for these people. Plain brown boxes, no questions asked, thick stacks of cash. But this felt different. I repeated his words in my mind, hoping that by saying them out loud, I could somehow make them less real. Pick up a trailer, near the border. Heading into the unknown. The rest area, I pulled into a rundown rest area just outside of the border. The place was barely alive, a forgotten outpost in the middle of nowhere. A few trucks were idling in the lot, their engines humming softly, but the place felt dead. No one was talking. No one was moving. The silence hung over everything like a thick fog. It was as if time had stopped here, as if the world beyond this place didn't matter anymore. In the distance, I spotted the SUV, a black vehicle parked off to the side, its headlights dim, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. And then I saw him, my contact. He stood there, still, like a statue, his silhouette cut sharp against the dimming sky. There was something off about him, something that made my skin crawl. His face was unreadable, hard as stone. But it was his eyes, cold, calculating, dead, that made my stomach churn. They locked onto mine, and I felt the chill in my bones. "Are you the driver?" His voice was low, gravelly, like the sound of tires grinding on an old, cracked road. Before I could answer, he opened the passenger door, climbed into my truck, and dropped a worn duffel bag on the floor between us. I wanted to ask what was inside, but something in his gaze stopped me. It was the kind of look that made you realize some questions weren't worth asking. He didn't say another word. He didn't need to. His presence told me everything. The chilling first encounter. Before I could take another step, the air was sliced by a gruff voice, sharp and unyielding. "Get back in your truck," it commanded. I froze. My heart hammered so violently I feared it might betray me. The voice was firm, like the strike of a hammer on steel, unforgiving, leaving no room for defiance. I could feel it in my bones, a presence looming over me, weighing me down. Every instinct screamed for me to turn around, to run, but my legs felt like lead, unresponsive. I staggered back, my mind racing faster than my feet could carry me, and before I knew it, the question escaped my lips, a whisper more than words. trembling with fear. "What's in there?" I barely recognized the sound of my own voice, betraying my terror, cracking under the weight of the moment. I couldn't hide, couldn't pretend I hadn't heard the strange noises coming from the trailer. My curiosity, once a small ember, now burned with a fierce intensity, though I knew better than to voice it aloud. The response came quickly, curt and final. "You don't want to know." His words were short, sharp, like a blade cutting through the fog of my confusion. There was no hesitation, no hint of kindness, just a cold finality that left me paralyzed. The weight of that simple sentence crushed any thought of resistance. It wasn't just an answer. It was a warning, a clear and unmistakable threat. I backed away, my legs trembling, my breath coming in shallow bursts, and I climbed back into the cab of my truck. The door slammed shut with a deafening thud, sealing me in darkness. Inside, the silence felt suffocating. I sat there, frozen, alone with the overwhelming sense that something was terribly wrong. The faint cry, the sound I'd heard from the trailer, echoed in my mind, over and over, like a loop that drilled itself into my soul. It was impossible to forget. It followed me, no matter where I went, like a shadow I could never escape. I had tried. I truly had. The horrific truth revealed. They led me down another set of creaking stairs, the steps groaning under our weight as we descended deeper into the earth. A heavy door loomed ahead, secured by a keypad. One of the men punched in the code, and as the door swung open, I gasped, my breath catching in my throat. What lay beyond the threshold was like nothing I had ever seen, and nothing I would ever unsee. Before me stretched a vast underground complex, bathed in harsh fluorescent light that flickered sporadically, casting long shadows that seemed to dance in the corners of my eyes. Row upon row of cramped cells lined the space, each one separated by chain-link fences and flimsy curtains that offered no privacy, no sanctuary from the horrors that lurked within. Men and women of all ages filled the cells, some sitting, some lying motionless, all with hollow faces and vacant eyes. Their expressions were haunting, their souls long extinguished. Some of them looked up as we passed, their eyes flickering with something, a silent plea, a glimmer of hope that had all but faded from the world. Others didn't even react, their bodies slumped in exhaustion, their minds lost to the madness of their captivity. They were ghosts, trapped in a nightmare that had no end. "Take a good look at what you delivered," one of the men sneered, shoving me forward. I stumbled, my knees buckling under the weight of the truth that hit me like a punch to the gut. These weren't packages. These weren't items to be delivered or sold. They were human beings, flesh and blood, exploited, trapped, suffering. The weight of complicity. They escorted me back to my truck, but the images of that underground prison were burned into my mind, seared into my soul. Every mile I drove now was haunted by the silent, desperate eyes of those imprisoned souls. Their unspoken pleas echoed with every turn of the wheel, a reminder that I was no longer just a driver. I was complicit. No amount of money, no matter how much it changed my life, could ever erase the guilt that weighed on me. I continued my long hauls across the country, but the miles stretched on forever, marked by sorrow and regret. My silence made me an unwilling participant in a world of human misery, a world I could no longer ignore. When news of high-profile trafficking cases began to surface, whispers started to connect certain names to these unspeakable crimes, whispers that began to haunt me, connecting the dots in ways I never wanted to see. The name of one man, in particular, kept rising to the surface. Diddy. the same name that had haunted my thoughts after that night in the basement, after the money changed hands, after my life was irrevocably altered. I had been part of it, a pawn in a game where human lives were the currency, and my soul bore the scars of that complicity. The road to guilt now. As I travel these lonely highways, those ghostly faces remain etched in my mind, following me like shadows. I've learned to trust that quiet voice of caution, the one we all have, but too often ignore. My story isn't one of heroism nor bravery. It's a warning, a lesson learned too late. Trust that uneasy feeling in your gut. It might be the only thing keeping you from being pulled into a darkness you'll never escape. Every sunrise reminds me of the price I paid, of the choices I made, and the cost of turning a blind eye. The road to wealth is often paved with human misery, and no matter how far I drive, I will always carry the burden of that day with me. Let my experience be your warning. If a job seems too lucrative, too simple, trust that there are shadows lurking beneath the surface. And when you find yourself in that moment, when the line between right and wrong becomes blurry, listen to your inner voice, because once you cross that line, there's no going back.